In the job section of the cloud code, you will find out how you can both define and schedule a job, which will enable you to run cloud code functions either at a set time or a specific time, or have it as a repetitive running, which could be a super useful feature for you, certainly when you're using smart contracts. But for now, we're just going to be taking a look at a basic example where we're going to rerun a cloud function using a job. Define moralis.cloud.job, you give the job a name, and then you pass through a function. There are some properties that will be available inside of the request, such as params, headers, log, or message, and you can destructure those if you wish to, and use the details inside of your function. I'm actually going to do something different. I'm just going to return the running of a cloud function instead. So what cloud function am I going to run? Well, if we look back on the database here, I had a function here that was called run create unit, and the create unit code looked something like this. We created a class, we added some methods into the class, and we had this create class method that enabled us to create a new unit where these details were all randomized. So I'm going to convert this into a cloud function. So I've copied the code and pasted it inside of a new cloud function called moralis.cloud.define. I'll just call it create unit, and everything else is the same as before. However, let's just close this terminal here. I had to make some changes, but because now this is going to be running on the cloud, there will be certain Moralis-based functionality that won't be possible to get. You'll notice in here, in the create side, I'm using moralis.user.current, which on the front end is fine, but in Moralis backend, that doesn't make any sense because the ID was going to be set to the user. But if I'm running this function from the cloud code, it's not going to have an ID. So what I'm going to do instead, I'll just have a conditional that says if there is an ID, then set the user's ID to that. But if not, then we'll just leave it. And that way it will return as undefined when it stores in the database. If we try and set it to anything else, then it's going to throw an error. And there was something similar, I think a bit further down when we were setting our access control list. So again, I've just put a conditional here to see if there is a user. And in the function, in the actual create method, I've passed in an ID. So now the create method is going to expect some sort of ID. So whenever you call the create method, you can pass it that. And this is actually passed the request.user. And so when it's set in the access control list, if there is a user, then it will set the access control list. But if there isn't a user, then it will just ignore that. So there will be no access control list. But I don't think creating a unit is the ideal use case for a job. It's just to demonstrate how you might get a job to work. So I copied that. And then the next thing I needed to do is create the job. So in the documentation, I copied across this piece of code. I removed everything else out of it. And I've declared a variable called run, which is an asynchronous function to moralis.cloud.run create unit. I haven't passed in any parameters here. So whenever this job runs, it will run our cloud function. So let's test that out. So if we save that and go up to our jobs section in the Moralis dashboard, you'll see that there is automatically a sync eth address job here. And now we have this one, my job 2, which is what it was called. And we can run that. So at the moment, if I just go to the browser, we've got 69 units here, it seems. Go over to the jobs. And we'll just run now. It says success, so we'll go back to the browser. And here you'll see a new user. So now we have 70. Rexstore is new. And we'll go back to jobs, we'll create another one. Back to the browser. And there's the next one. And now we've got Taineray in our database. Now it hasn't got a user pointer and it also hasn't got an ACL. But it just goes to show you how you can use a job to then call a separate cloud function. If we go back to jobs, you can schedule the jobs. You can go up here, choose schedule, give it a description, pick the cloud job that you want, put in the parameters if you have any parameters that you want to pass. I don't have any. If you want to start it immediately, I'll say yes. Should it repeat? I'll say yes. And how often should it repeat? I should say it's on an interval. And what interval do you want to repeat it? So I'll say every minute. And it's about 6 o'clock here, so we will say after, say, 5 o'clock. And then we'll schedule that. And here you'll see that it's been set. And so this says that each day, every 1 minute after 1700 hours, starting 10th of October. Okay, so we're actually 10th of November, but I think this is probably an index-related problem at 1749. Go to our browser here, I can actually see already a new unit's been created. I've got 72 there now. Walkerson was created. I wonder if in another minute another one will be created. So I just left that for a couple of minutes and come back, and now we've got 74. So you can see that that is running, and it's running just fine. And you can see in here, if you go down to job status, you can see that the job ran. There were a couple of times where I was testing that it was failing, but now it all seems to be working absolutely fine. And you can see that the last 3 that succeeded here were all on the minute. And that is how you would work with jobs using Cloud Code.